Hello and welcome to another edition of Analyst Insights. This is a program where we discuss everything around the capital markets, the local capital markets, and also economic issues. So for this week, I'm joined by my colleague Rufaro. Welcome to Analyst Insights, Rufaro.
Thank you for having me.
So this week we have got a few issues that we just need to discuss, the major developments on our capital markets. And the first issue that we want to talk about is on the Victoria Falls Exchange. There has been a lot of talk and exciting stories that were coming from that exchange. And I think maybe just to get us going, looking at 2021, what's your assessment of the Victoria Falls Exchange and its contribution to the capital markets?
So there have been some positive developments with the VFEX, as it's popularly described amongst capital markets players in this part of the world. You have the listing of Caledonia, you have the listing of Bindura Nickel. So, CITCO is no longer the lone listed stock there. But unfortunately, it's still a very illiquid market. We see very little trading there. It hasn't quite fulfilled its mandate as a platform to raise hard currency capital, although Caledonia has indicated that they're looking to raise about $8 million.
Yes, so, and maybe talking about Caledonia, they have actually said that the DRs have actually been oversubscribed. What would you attribute that to? Is it because of the market is excited? Are these local investors, foreign investors?
So I think we want to take what's happening with Caledonia in context, because firstly, what's Caledonia, the instrument that they've listed on the VFEX is a depository receipt. So this is not actually common equity stock that they've issued in the surrounding market. It's basically a mirror of the actual equity instruments in, I think it is Canada, Toronto.
Okay.
And I suspect that they're going to raise money, primarily in the first world, which they will deploy here, which they probably were planning to do already, but they want to take advantage of the increased retention on expansion. So it's kind of the same thing that's happening with Madenga, where they've listed on the VFEX because they were expanding anyway, and they've noted that they will benefit from the increased retentions from that expansion, and they've listed on that basis. But in terms of why we have capital markets in the first instance to raise capital, we haven't quite seen a company list or introduced on the VFEX to raise money in hard currency from the VFEX. They've, what we've seen so far is companies that already had plans to expand to raise money, just take advantage of the incentives. So I think that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the VFEX unlocking its vision as a hard currency capital market that legitimately raises money in its own right, and where local pension funds and other institutional and retail investors are able to participate.
Yeah, but did you expect the local market, given the foreign currency problems that we have, to be able to put in 8 million into Caledonia? Do you think any other company that's going to be listed on the VFEX, the ones that are not listing by introduction, but want to raise some bit of capital, be able to raise that amount of money?
Sadly, the answer to that is no. In terms of capital raising, for the most part, and until we see evidence otherwise, the VFEX is a white elephant. It's really just a platform for export-generating companies to take advantage of the incentives to be listed on VFEX. It's not a genuine capital market in terms of raising capital.
Okay, and your views on Bindura? They are also joining the great trek onto the Victoria Falls Exchange.
So I think it's exciting that we have local companies that are able to raise money and expand their operations and grow exports, which is clearly what Bindura intends to do. It's so in the context of that, it makes sense for them to be listed on VFEX because they retain more of their incremental exports. So I think that's a positive. But I also think that there's a sad aspect to the story to the extent that because it's so illiquid on the VFEX, most institutional and retail investors will not be able to participate in any growth or excitement in Bidura. It's kind of limits, the universe of participants in the stock to, elite investors who can, who have access to hard currency.
Okay.
And so the liquidity, which is what we've seen with Palenga. If you look at its history on the ZSE, it was one of the more liquid stocks, and it had a broad, there was a broad class of investors that routinely and regularly participated in buying and selling the stock. But since its transition to VFEX, the liquidity has fallen off a cliff, and the universe of investors that are based in Zimbabwe that can participate in Palenga has also fallen off a cliff.
Okay, so maybe just taking us to the ZSE. In the last 12 months, I think we have seen quite some tremendous performance by the listed companies, both in terms of the operations, most of them reporting volume increases in the magnitude above 30%, and also the share prices have gone up by, in some cases, as much as 100%. What do you make of that, and do you think it's something that we should look forward to come 2022?
So look, I think it's a positive. I think 2020 was a difficult year on account of COVID and all the restrictions and the economic contraction that we saw in that year. But when you look at the performance this year, year to date, I think we have to view it in the context of the low base, that we're comparing, that growth is coming from, because there was this shrinkage last year. So a lot of that growth is coming off a low base. So we need to discount that. And so going into 2022, it will really be quite interesting to see whether we're able to sustain that growth. And then there's another aspect as well of high inflation in our country at the moment, and the ZSE being a safe haven for Zim dollars. Investors who are trying to ring fence their Zim dollar holdings from inflation. So a lot of that performance is not indicative of optimism in terms of the underlying company and its earnings and its outlook. It's basically a retreat to safety from inflation, and it's unfortunately it's a leading indicator of inflation, where if investors had better options, they would probably invest there, but they don't. There's been a crackdown on parallel market, so the investors with huge Zim dollar holdings are forced to park their savings on the ZSE, and that demand supply, it then moves the demand supply dynamic, so that the performance that we see on the ZSE stocks is significantly higher than what you'd expect justified from the performance of the actual underlying company.
Okay, so maybe before we move on to the outlook, I think I will just put it to you guys. We just want to find out what do you think is the correct evaluation of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange? I think you have heard so many commentators talking about the fact that maybe the market is overvalued. So if you're talking of a market that's overvalued, there has to be a benchmark or some sort of a position. Where do you think the market, the correct value of the market should be? Is it 3.5 billion? Is it 5 billion? Is it what number? And why do you think that is the case? And maybe just to hear from you, what do you think has been driving the market in the last 12 months? Is it something that we should also expect coming into 2022? And maybe just to conclude, just talk about 2022. So looking ahead, earnings, what do you think is going to be driving the market? Is it some correction? Is it some earnings outlook that will be positive? And how do you make of the involvement of foreign investors in 2022? vis-a-vis what we've seen in 2021?
So sadly, in 2021, we've seen a net exodus of foreign investors, and I don't think we will see a reversal of this in 2022 because we don't have the kind of foreign currency framework where most foreign investors believe they're getting fair value on entry into the market. So the official rate, I think, this week is at 108. On the power market, we're hearing of trades at 200, 200 plus. So any foreign investor bringing their money into our country through formal channels is, in real terms, losing half their value. So it doesn't make sense to invest on such a basis. So I think that short of a U-turn on our current foreign currency regime, I think that the net movement, especially as far as the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange is concerned, for foreign investors will be an exit. Now, so the big question mark really is to what extent the momentum we're seeing in inflation, will it continue? I think for most of this year, we saw a bit of government discipline in terms of the deficit spending, and we saw inflation on a slowing down trajectory. So that was positive, although over the last 2-3 months, month-to-month inflation has started to tick up. And if that trend continues, then we're going to have hyperinflation next year. And that doesn't bode well for the economy, because in a hyperinflationary economy, savers are losing money and businesses become more defensive than expansionary. So I think it's really in the government's court in terms of how we see 2022. If they revert to what we saw in the first half of this year, where they had tight fiscal policy, then inflation would slow down significantly, and then we might see a lot of investment and some growth. Then the other X factor in 2022 is foreign currency, COVID. I think we had a big scare recently with the Omicron variant. We had lockdowns, we had European and other Western countries put Zimbabwe on the red list.
Yeah, talking of lockdown, do you think they're helpful in trying to deal with this pandemic?
So there was actually quite an interesting article this week by CNN analyst Farid Zakaria, where he was looking at the new variant, and he was speaking to the new way of looking at things, which is, instead of looking at cases, how many new cases a week or a day and what the 7-day moving average is, it probably makes much more sense to look at hospitalizations, because in jurisdictions where the level of vaccination is quite high, cases can go up quite significantly without seeing a similar uptick in hospitalizations and deaths. So I think that the moral of the story is that vaccinations move the needle, they help. And as we continue to see rollout of vaccines all over the world, touch wood, 2022 will be a year where whatever variants come out, we don't see a repeat of lockdowns and restrictions and red lists, and the world's economy and our economy has an opportunity to genuinely take off.
Thanks so much, Rufaro. There you have it. So it was another episode of Analyst Insights, and we've tried to look at the 2021 performance and also the outlook for 2022. Please feel free to comment on our social media platform, and we want also to get more feedback on how best we can improve your program. So otherwise, have a good day and see you at the next episode. Bye-bye.